Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Terumos, Perek Beis. We are still up to Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Chaf, starting Mamish on top of the Amid, actually starting on the second line from the top of the Amid, Masiv Rabbi Bar Mamel. We are dedicating today's class to Ilui Nishmas, Kevan's father, Nisan ben Avraham. May his neshama have an aliyah. Amen. And we learned a lot of steps yesterday to come back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah tells us that, number one, you're not allowed to separate Truma from Tamei and Tahor, Min HaTamei ala Tahor. Second of all, the Mishnah says by us that if you did it, it depends whether you did it b'shoigeg or b'mezid. If you did it b'shoigeg, Truma say Truma. If you did it b'mezid, then we say loy asav loy klum. Okay, hold that. So we went through a whole series of halachas based on the final Mishnah of Tful Yom. We explained yesterday how Truma is separated physically when removing the Truma portion from the wine, being that there's a law of Min HaMukayf. They would actually put the bucket down into the vat. They would allow that the bucket should be filled with the approximate 2% generally for a Truma Gedoyla, and they would, begin to lift the bucket, but while the bucket is still in the vat, there they would declare that which is in the vat, that which is in the bucket is Truma. We spoke about the two potential problems and the solution of making a Tanai. Then we learned in the Braisa, we learned yesterday in Tful Yom, that the Tana Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that even if no explicit stipulation Tanai was made, there's what we will call a Tanai Bezdin. The Tanai Bezdin is that if there's either, this is continuing Shitas Reb Shimon, either if there's going to be spillage, or if what is in the bucket becomes Tamei, automatically, retroactively, it's no longer going to be Truma. And we explained yesterday how this retroactive nullification of Truma, because it was made on a condition, even though Rabbi Yossi, you didn't say it, Bezdin says it for you, that solves the two potential problems. Then we went on. Then we learned that the Braisa says, we learned the Braisa that if you were to separate Truma Gedoyla and, first of all, that the Tanai Bezdin of Rabbi Yossi is only for Truma Gedoyla. The Tanai Bezdin of Rabbi Yossi is not for Trumas Meiser, because Trumas Meiser does not have to be separated min hamukaf. Then we learned the Braisa that says that if you separate it together, Truma Gedoyla and Trumas Meiser, we will use the Tanai Bezdin of Rabbi Yossi. And the Gemara wanted to know why. If the Tanai only works for Truma Gedoyla, but it does not work for Trumas Meiser, in other words, Trumas Meiser should not be retroactively undone, then why wouldn't we say that if there's an issue, then the Truma Gedoyla goes back to being Tevel, and the Trumas Meiser remains? For that, Yehuda Beribi, the wise Rabbi Yehuda, responded, and that's where we have to go for coming back to the Mishnah, because it doesn't make sense for a person to want for him violate a lav in the Torah. When the Torah, we're going to learn this later. We're going to learn that in Parshas Mishpatim, when the Torah says Miliyascha v'dimacher loisa acher normally means don't delay. Chazal learn it means don't take Trumas u'Maisres out of the right order. If you're going to say that the Tanai Bezdin only applies to the Truma Gedoyla, it will not apply to the Trumas Meiser, what will happen? What will happen de facto is that the owner removed Trumas Meiser before he removed Truma Gedoyla, which means that he violated the law. He went out of the prescribed Torah order. No one wants to do that. So therefore, coming back, if you remove Truma and Truma Gedoyla together, yeah, we will, L'shitas Rabbi Yossi, we will apply the Tanai Bezdin. What did we extract from all of this? Is that in principle, a Jew does not want to violate what it says in the Torah. Now, if one makes such a choice that's called b'mezid, then that was the person's choice. But if a person doesn't know what's really happening, now I'm going to speak out the question. It's such a good question. Coming back to our Mishnah. What is our Mishnah? You have a tummy pile and a tahor pile. All right? You're not allowed to separate min hatamei ala tahor. But the Mishnah says if you did it, b'shoigeg, it's truma. Why? Why? You didn't know that you did something wrong. If you would have known, you wouldn't have done it. A person doesn't want to violate a prohibition. Now, I know this is not a lav, being mafresh min hatome al hatoir. I get it, not a lav. So what? But why don't we say b'mezid? First of all, b'mezid lo yasav lo klum. But Mela by b'mezid, that's the person's choice to do something that he should not be doing. And now that we learned that there's a possibility when a person separates truma, this is amazing, that chachamim can completely undo what you did. Why would we say that you made a separation? If I imtarim truma say truma, which is in violation, why, at least let Rabbi Yossi, why wouldn't there be like a Tanai Beis Din? A person doesn't want to violate what it says in the Torah. If I would have known, I wouldn't have done it. It should be as if the Beis Din is saying every time I separate truma, that if there is an issue, automatically it should be undone. What a great question. And then we're going to have a great answer. And we're going to see one nekuda from this whole discussion, that many times, not always, many times, when people think that they're doing something l'chumra, right, they're going beyond the letter of the law, and they're being stringent, many stringencies leads to leniencies. And that will be the neshama of the response of the differentiation, as we'll see when we learn this inside, between our case and between the whole buildup from the final Mishnah in Tful Yom. Okay, now I'm just going to give the topics of today. It's a big daf today. We had in our Mishnah, like we just mentioned, that if a person was toire minatome alatoir, the Mishnah is machalek shoygeg mezit. The Gemara will bring a braisa b'shem Rabbi Yossi, that there is no such differentiation after the whole drasha, that Rabbi Yossi holds. Same rule. You're not allowed to be mafresh min hatomei alatoir. But im taram min hatomei alatoir, says the Tana Rabbi Yossi that we don't have in the Mishnah, bein b'shoigeg, bein b'mezid, masha asu asu. So we're going to go into that. Masha asu asu. Another din, that the Mishnah brought Rabbi Yehuda, that says that if you once knew it was tamei, and then you forgot that it's tamei, we consider that to be a mezid. I'm going to just give out right now, but we have in Pirkei Avos, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer in Perek Daled, that Shigegas Talmud Oile Zaden. I think l'chayda that's the din over here, but I'll speak it out more when we come back to our Gemara. Okay, now on Amid Beis, this is especially for the Gabbai. The Gabbai has a ahava that he's getting from me in the dinim of Tum and Tara. And every now and then we merit to learn that part of the Torah. The Mishnah says that if a person toivels kelim on Shabbos, the issue of toiveling kelim is you're being misaken mana midrabanan. Prior to the tefillah, you can't use it, right? Now that you toiveled it, you could use it. So you rectify the utensil. Any rectification that is discernible to the eye, that means it's a physical rectification of a utensil, that is in violation of makeh b'patish. But here, the keli did not physically change. Any type of rectification that's not discernible to the eye, we're going with the mahalech is asur midrabanan. And the Mishnah there also is machalek, that if a person did it b'shoigeg, then masha asu asu. Then they can use it on Shabbos. If a person knew you're not allowed to toivel a keli, and yet they did it, the Mishnah says that b'mezid you cannot use it. That was another difference between shoigeg and mezid. Now, not so simple. We're going to learn something that I don't remember ever learning, and our sugya will hold that we are allowed to make a ha'arama, means a subterfuge. A subterfuge means that as long as to the observer it does not appear that we're doing something that we're not allowed to do, we are allowed to do it. This b'chlal is a big sugya. When are we allowed to make a ha'arama? Like, who are we fooling? We're tricking. And when are we not allowed to make it? We're going to have a lot of that today. But let me share now a couple of nekudas when it comes to the dinim of Tum and Tara, and we'll leave the topic of a ha'arama from when we learned the Gemara today inside. Number one, a keli, a utensil, midoi raisa, can only become tamei from a av. If an av has halachic contact with the keli becomes a rishon. The keli needs to undergo tvila, and as we learned yesterday, even after you would toivel the keli needs head of shemesh for you to be allowed to put truma in the keli. because the keli has the level of sheni in it, mida oiraisa. Head of shemesh is a din de oiraisa. On the other hand, if a keli had contact with a rishon, if the rishon is liquid, midrabanan, the keli is tamei. Also, now it's tamei on the level of a sheni. A liquid can be metama a keli midrabanan. The keli has to go to the mikvah. Aber once you toivel that keli, you do not need head of shemesh. The keli is allowed to be used with truma and kachim immediately. Just remember that as the basic rules to the topic that we will be learning today. Coming back to our sugya, we're going to have a very strong limitation. When the Mishnah says your matbel kelim b'Shabbos b'mezik, you cannot use it. We'll see that in many cases you could use it as long as you did it the right way, as we will see inside. Okay, Chavra, coming back to Daf Chaf, we're going to inside. Daf Chaf Amid Aleph, second line from the top of the Amid. We have this rule that we will, Rabbi Yosi, apply a Tanai Beis Din, which is that I don't want for my hafrashas truma to take effect from the beginning if doing so is in violation of what the Torah says. Based on that, Mosev Rabba Bar Momol, this is such a good question. But did we not learn in our Mishnah that number one, ein toiremin min hatamei alator? And then the Mishnah, the Gemara again, the Yerushalmi is mekatzer, and then the Mishnah says, but if you did it b'mezid, then lo yasav lo klum. But if you did it b'shoigeg, then it's truma. Why is that? Hagatzmacha. Now think about it. That if a person shet taram, why don't we say va'amar lo also al datoy la'avar al divrei Torah? According to Rabbi Yehuda Beribi, why would we not say that a person was shoygig, the guy didn't know that the pile was tamei? We're not allowed to take off. It's so good, right? Of it from tamei alator. He didn't know anything is wrong. If he would have known, he never would have done it, right? People don't want to violate divrei Torah. So why are we saying that b'shoygig his designation takes effect? No, let us say that b'shoygig should be like b'mezid, that lo yasav lo klum. Mamash Gavaldik. And here, the same one that asked the question, the same Rabbi Bar Mamol, is the same one that gave the answer. Hu moisev, hu mefadek, hu moisev, hu metaretz. Amar Rabbi Bar Mamol. You're right that a person doesn't want to violate al divrei Torah. But if you think that there is a simple solution, and that is, what he did is undone, don't forget, Aviv, the pile was tamei, you did not know about it. So when you remove truma, what did you think? You didn't know that you did something wrong. Let's go with it. The Chachamim should say automatically it's undone. You know what's going to happen right now? You'll have a pile of produce. You will think it's mesukin. What is it really? Tevel. The violation of eating tevel is a chayv misa b'idei shamayim. Chayv, that's a much bigger violation. So you're gonna undo a smaller violation that's gonna lead to a greater violation. That's why the person doesn't want for it to be done. Im oimar at kein nimtseisa mavricha min hakala. Very nice. Kala means relative to eating tevel. Being toidem min hatamei al hatahar is called an aveda kala, relative. Okay, so you're going to undo an aveda kala. That will bring about an aveda chamura. Umachnisa lechamura. Why? Because tevel is ba'avoin misa. How great is that? That's number one. Number two. What are you going to counter? I'm going to counter. Hold on. Okay, so we're going to allow the separation to happen. Don't forget, no one knows that it's tummy. So what's going to happen, Aviv? You're going to give it to the kohen. The kohen is going to eat what? Truma Tameya. Truma Tameya is also a big violation. Yes, it is. But eating Truma Tameya is a violation of a positive commandment. And a violation of a mitzvahs asay is lesser of a violation than being oived on a misa b'dei shamayim violation. Beautiful. In other words, that another step, says the Gemara, that tohar she'achal es hatamei, this is in reference to the kohen that's receiving really tamei truma, thinking it's tohar, and the kohen eating it, is taka a biblical violation. But what type of violation? A violation of a asay. We're going to learn all these psukim later. Don't worry. We'll have all of the sources later. Eating tevel is misa b'dei shamayim. Misa b'dei shamayim is a much stricter violation. Masha'enkein, in the whole sugya of Tful Yoim, whether there was spillage, there was spillage. The whole case there that it became tamei is it became tamei because a Tful Yoim touched it. The only problem is the guy who separated didn't verbalize the separation. Rabbi Yossi says, I don't need you to verbalize it because we have a Tanai Bezdin. Was in the case of Tful Yoim, the undoing of the Truma doesn't lead to any potential violation. Here, it will vadai lead to a potential violation of eating tevel. And like I mentioned in the introduction, there are many times that when a person is machmer, they think they're being machmer, they're being mekel. That's the way we word it. That's a challenge in life. That when people are only looking narrowly at what's in front of them, many times they think, let me be machmer. But the vision that one needs to have, the Rabbi Yehuda Beribi, the Chachma, is to see what will this lead to? What else is affected in this scenario? You get it? That's important. That's a very big klal in life. Okay, moving on. And even though in our Mishnah, the whole thing of differentiating between shogeg and mezid is introduced in our Mishnah, when a person is mafresh min atom mei al hatohoir, and from that we went into many other examples in the Mishnah that are not trumais related, where we differentiate between shogeg and mezid. The first one is hamatbel kelim b'Shabbos. Before we get there, the Gemara wants us to know that for whatever reason Rabbeinu Hakadosh did not include in our Mishnah here that it's really subject to our machlekes tanoim. But now we should know that Tanei b'Shem Rabbi Yosei, that in the case of being toirim min hatamei ala toir, there is no difference between shogeg and mezid. Im toirim min hatamei ala toir, says the Rabbi Yosei, bein b'shogeg. Bein b'mezid, masha asui asui. I just want to say the following. Perhaps. I'm saying this as a perhaps. What was the whole Gemara's kasha? The whole Gemara's kasha was Latana Rabbi Yossi. The Rabbi Yossi is the one in Tvul Yoim that says that there's a Tanai Bezdin. The Chachamim of the Mishnah, Rab Shimon, don't agree to such a Tanai Bezdin. Maybe the Gemara is introducing this Rabbi Yossi, maybe, to give a different answer than the answer of Rabbi Bo Bar Mamol. In other words, the whole kasha that we had would be that according to Rabbi Yossi, why would we say that b'shoigeg? Why would we say by b'shoigeg that truma say truma? Why don't we make it Rabbi then? Maybe the Gemara is saying that we have a Tana. Rabbi Yossi doesn't differentiate between shogeg and mezid. I think this might be an answer for that. Because if you look at shogeg like a mezid, by b'mezid, this vada no Tanai Bezdin. This could be a big chilik between here and Tful Yoim. I think maybe that's takat pshat on the Gemara. The Gemara found that Abraisa. Rabbi Yossi Bechlal doesn't agree that we're machalik between shogeg and mezid. You can't ask, let this itself create a difference. We don't say that. Once you tell me that shogeg and mezid is the same, then you can't apply it to Tanai Bezdin. Because by mezid, masha asu asui, so by b'shogeg, masha asu asui. Yeah, for sure. No, but the whole case of Tful Yoim is that since the only way to be mafresh truma by wine is by doing something that there is a moment of risk. Before you remove the bucket from the vat, the bucket might spill, etc. So everyone was trying him over there with a Tanai. And this guy forgot. It's different. I think that's the Rabbi Yossi over here. Okay, now moving on to the next case of the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, right, what does Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the Tanakama that we are machalik between shoygig and mezid. The only thing Rabbi Yehuda says is that what's the definition of shoygig? That no one knew it's tamei. If you, the owner, if you knew it was tamei and you forgot it was tamei, even though when you were mafresh you were a shoygig, Rabbi Yehuda says that's not called a shoygig. We're going to call that a card of lemezid and lo yasav lo klum. So says the Gemara, Rav Pinchas ba'a kume Rabbi Yasa. Sometimes ba'a is a statement. Here ba'a is like it is in the Bavli. Ba'a means he inquired. At kedoin, I get the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. The savur behem shehin tohoiden. And he knew before that it was tamei. So the shoygig was on its status of tumah and tara. Here is where Rabbi Yehuda, so to say, is more machmed. He says it's considered a kar of lamezid. However, asks the Gemara, what happens if if the guy knew that it's tamei? The shgaga was not in the status of tumah and tara. The shgaga was he did not know the halacha, but the savar he always thought. Not he forgot. Shemutar litroim min hatomei al hatoid. What will Rabbi Yehuda hold? You never knew that it was asur to be toidem min hatomei al hatoid. Is that considered a shoygig? Or is that not considered a shoygig? Now, the way we will learn the Gemara does not answer this inquiry. The Gemara just points out that this inquiry obviously is only Shitas Rabbi Yehuda and not Shitas Rabbi Yosi. We just quoted the Rabbi Yosi that holds that bein b'shogig bein b'mezid masha asui asui. So this whole inquiry shows us that no one followed Shitas Rabbi Yosi, because if we were to accept that bein b'shogig bein b'mezid the same din masha asui asui, then it's irrelevant whether never knowing the halacha is considered a shoygig or whether it's considered a mezid. Who cares? Lamay nafkamina. That's the point of what Rabbi Yasa is telling. He didn't answer the inquiry. He just made that observation. Amalei that Yos Rabbi Sovek Rabbi Yehuda. I see, Rabbi, you're asking the question. Rabbi meaning Rav Pinchas. Now I know that you follow. We paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. Because Benam ke Rabbi Yosi, because if we would have followed the sheet of Rabbi Yosi that we just quoted in the Braisa, that this issue of Tamei al Tahir, it's always Masha Asui Asui, he hada. Who cares whether forgetting the halacha, whether you never knew the halacha, whether you forgot the mitzias, lamay nafkamina, that makes no difference. Post facto, it's always going to be effective. Now, when it says in Pirkei Yavis, Avakash, in Pedig Dalad, right? That Shigagas Talmud Oila Zodin. What does Shigagas Talmud Oila Zodin mean, my friends? It doesn't mean forgetting the Talmud. It means not learning. If a guy says, what are you saying, Yakir? Shigagas Talmud means you didn't know. You didn't learn. You didn't know.
You learned wrong. Shigagas Talmud, you learned wrong.
I thank you. But you always learned wrong. You always learned wrong. In other words, I have a question. Why? Rav Pinchas didn't know the Tana, didn't know Pirkei Yavis, Shigagas Talmud Oila Zodin. So if you savar shemuta litamin atomei alatoy, why is that not called Shigagas Talmud? I understand that Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah also is saying that if you forgot, that's called Shigagas Talmud, a different type of Shigagas Talmud. And with the fact that you didn't make an effort to review. Also in Pirkei Yavis, right? That kol hashikech davarach b'mishnasei is malol v'akosef kilu mischayv v'nafshay. Yachol takval v'mishnasei. That's only if Yishayesha v'yisirim beliba. In other words, there is a certain expectation for us to review our learning at some point where you can't say, I forgot. You should have chazer. I would just say one thing, that the Rebbe always emphasized, that Pirkei Yavis is called Mila de Chasidusa. And therefore, with that which is considered a rule in beyond the letter of the law, which would be in Pirkei Yavis, Shigagas Talmud Oila Zodin, doesn't necessarily apply to the basic halacha. Maybe that's why you can't bring that which Rabbi Yehuda says in Pirkei Yavis to resolve a question bishitas Rabbi Yehuda over here. Here we're learning the letter of the law, not beyond the letter of the law. Maybe. Another thing, like Yakir is saying, Shigagas Talmud might mean that if you learn wrong. Here the question is like, I never learned. I will say like this, that in Hilchei Shabbos, we always have this topic. When it comes to the shoygig, remember the Jenna. Is it shigagas malacha or is it shigagas Shabbos? What type of shoygig is it? Whether, for example, whether you're chayv al kol aved. If a person violated all lamates malachas, right? So why was the Torah machalit lamates malachas? To tell you, right, Aviv, if a person on Shabbos violates many malachas from the 39, he has to bring a carbon chatas for each one. Remember that? That you knew it's Shabbos. You knew it's Shabbos. Elamah, you didn't know that what? You didn't know that you can't do that on Shabbos. Same, you didn't know. There it's called a shoygig by Shabbos. You didn't know the halacha. Clearly called a shoygig. Over there, if you knew you can't do A, B, C on Shabbos, but you forgot it Shabbos, that's one, forgetful. If you bring one carbon chatas. I just want to point out that by Hilchas Shabbos, we don't say Shigas Talmud Zajac. We don't say that over there. You say Chayv carbon chatas. You're not Chayv skila, God forbid. Interesting. How do you resolve that? Like, what's even the question? Why would we think that if a guy thinks it's muta litrim and atome yalatoid, why would that be considered amazing? Why is that amazing? The guy doesn't know the halacha. Why would this be different than other areas in halacha? I'm leaving questions open. I don't know. Maybe I need more coffee. Okay.
Maybe we'll also add on, if we dealing already baskin on בפרקי אבות, הווה זהיר במצווה קלה כבחמורה. That's
a kasha on what we learned before.
But but connected. I know that, but I'm saying connected to Shkagat Talmud Malas Adon.
Okay, hold that thought. I just want to the b'shem oimrei. I forgot the younger man that told me that there are two Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakovs is a younger man, a Lubavitcher younger man, Moshe Wiener. Stop. I just want to remember because that was a big thing for me. I'm just going back now. Shigigas Talmud. I never knew. Now I know. I shouldn't forget it. I have to chazer it. Okay. Moving on. Chevra daf chaf amid beis. These are beloved parts of the Gemara, of Torah Shebal Peh, the dinim of Tum and Tara. The Mishnah, after mentioning that L'shitas Rabbi Yehuda, we know now, not L'shitas Rabbi Yosi, that if a person was Torah min hatomei al hatoir, what's the halacha? Depends, shogeg or mezid. The Mishnah brought other areas in halacha where we make such a differentiation. And the first is hamatbil kelim b'Shabbos. The issue is tikkun mana. We're going that this issue is a rabbinic issue. Why is it a rabbinic issue? Because any type of rectification that's not gashmius or not discernible to the eye, to our eyes, not tzadikim's eyes, such a rectification is asur midrabanan. And we always learned this. You're not allowed to be toivel a keli that's tamei on Shabbos, whether it's the issue of tum and tara, whether it's the other issue related to Parshas Mata is that the v'toher, the extra v'toher. From there we learn that if goyim own the keli, if a yid buys it, not borrows it, when you go into a chveis, when you have a glass at the airport of a cup of water, right? No problem at all, because you don't own it. The establishment, which is a non-Jewish establishment, owns it. But if you buy a keli, if it belonged to a guy, whether the keli is new, whether the keli is old, I'm not talking about beliois. We're not the fact that it was owned. It has to go to the mikveh. Whichever type of tefillah is needed, that type of tefillah is a rectification, tikkun mana, and you may not do it on Shabbos. And the question is, and if someone did it, and if someone did, so our Mishnah says, well, it depends. If you did it b'shoigig, you can use it on Shabbos. If a person knowingly did it on Shabbos, b'mezid, they're not allowed to use it on Shabbos. That is what the Mishnah says. Hold on. Now, I don't remember learning this together, Chevra. Not in the Gemara, not in the Rambam, but here we're learning Yerushalmi. Our sugi here is very lenient. Actually, the Gemara will allow a person to use ha'arama. Ha'arama means in English literally to subterfuge, which means to oisnaden. You're putting up a facade. You're making a make-believe, and we are allowing it to work, meaning that the primary issue of tefillah is like a marasayin. That's what it looks like. Generally, I understand that harama, as long as it doesn't look like you're doing something wrong, so no one else will learn from you and apply it in the wrong area, because we're going to see that essentially tefillas kelim is not a problem. But if another person who's not learned will see me toiveling my kelim on Shabbos, they will say for themselves, if I'm allowed to rectify the keli by taking it to the mikvah, if the screw is loose, if something is broken, and they're just going to give it a little fix, they also are allowed to do it. So for that not to happen, I can't toivel my kelim. For me not to be a bad role model. Basically, it's like a marasayin issue. And if there is no marasayin issue, then there's no problem. Let's go inside. Says the Gemara Masnisa, a statement. Our Mishnah is only speaking about kelim gedolim, large utensils, in which you generally cannot make a ha'arama. Now, what ha'arama are we talking about? A very simple ha'arama. I'll just say it by heart. If I have a utensil, think about it. My keli aviv is tamei. It was normal for people, whenever there's no issue of carrying because there's an eruv, there's a body of water, and I want to drink. They didn't have a bottled plastic poison water then. They wanted water. They went to the well. They went to the spring. If I stick my cup into the spring and I lift it up and I drink water, that's the normal way people would drink water. If my keli is tamei and I know that it's tamei, and I put it under the water bekavana to be toivel it, but I do it in a way that it appears that what I am doing is the norm of retaking water from the body of water, you are allowed to do it. Even though I know that I'm doing it letfilas kelim, I really didn't need to drink the water. Kelim gedolim, people don't take a large box to drink water. No, it's by a big keli. The only reason why a person would take a large utensil into the body of water is when they want to be toivel it. So you can't make an aharama. Masnisa bekelim gedolim. Aval bekelim ketanim gavaldik. Mas ma'arim aleim umatbilam. Look inside the top marafulda. Aval bekelim ketanim ma'arim aleim ki ilu. You make believe as if roitzel amalis mayim l'shasiya. Umetoich kach also lois zel litfila. The derech kelim ketanim lishtois mehem. Avol kelim gedolim ein derech bekach umechze the litfila kamachavin. Problem is that who are you tricking? When people will look at you, they know, it appears, it's evident, it's obvious that you're doing it to be toivil kelim. Wow. I don't remember ever learning this. I always remember this rule that you can't be toivel kelim on Shabbos because it's tikkun mana midrabanan. We're saying no. We're saying that harama works. Now, can one say that harama works a lot more by derabanans than doiraisas? Yes. But let's keep on going. Let's push further. Says the Gemara, don't be shocked. When you hear this, you say, what are you talking about? The Gemara, the Yerushalmi, found a braisa, which is even better. It says clearly in a braisa, taught by Rabbi Shaya, that memalehu adam keli tame min haboir umarim olav umarbiloi. Beautiful. The same din. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you even more. Once you swallowed this pill, once you got what you learned, we didn't know. I didn't know it correctly. Really, the problem of tfilas kelim is that it looks like people might learn from me that you can be a misak and mana. If there's no such issue, then you can do it. Now, v'tani, we learned in a braisa that if nafal dolyoy l'teichabar, if one's bucket fell into the well.
Please, thank you. Yes.
Kevin, if you can just put your mute on, that would be great. If a large utensil fell into the pit, now I know is commonly used to take water out of the well. By the bucket, I'm katanim. But the kilyoy will be the kelim gedolim. But once it fell in, why can you remove it from the mikvah? Because if it fell in, you toivel the kelim. What are they looking at? They're looking at the keli. Take it out. If my large keli fell into the mikvah, like, why do I need ha'arama? We not learn it. That's the biggest. It's like an oinus. No, it's in the Rambam. When we learned the Rambam, the Kesef Mishnah, I forgot where. That when is it that when something is tummy that goes into the mikveh, when does it become toir? It means a person, it means a keli. Most people think, when you go under the water. No. You know when the tummy becomes tahor, when that is taken away from the mikveh, when you get out of the mikveh. It's not the going into the mikveh, it's going out of the mikveh. And that's a very deep concept. Because how does Tara work? Tara works by like a person. You can't live under the water. I mean, without utensils. You need to breathe. So when you go into the water, it's as if that the old ended. Ending of the old doesn't bring Tara. Doesn't bring Tara. Maybe it removes the tumah because there's nothing. The Tara is that you come out, now you are renewed. It's the coming out of the mikveh. So in other words, you would have thought that if a keli falls into the well on Shabbos, you got to leave it in the well. Since we're not allowed to be matbel kelim b'Shabbos, the large keli fell into the well, then leave it in the well. So says the Braisa, now that we know that the issue is one more of appearance, and therefore we allow a ha'arama, now that it fell into the water, you have a built-in ha'arama. Because people saw that it fell in. When something falls into the water, normally what do? You remove it. The fact that this keli happened to be tamei, and your act of removal makes it tahor, is not a problem. If the issue would be a essential issue that I'm not allowed to bring tara to a keli midrabanan tikun mana, then you would not be allowed to remove it, even though it fell into the water accidentally. Because the act of tara is not the going in. The act of tara is the going out. That is where the isid is. The isid would be l'shita sarama when you remove it from the mikveh. You are allowed to remove it. Now the Gemara says today Amoyroim. However, there's a machlekes Amoyroim as to when do we allow ha'arama. One Amoyra held that if the issue is biblical, like we spoke out on the words of introduction, which would be if any av has halachic contact with the keli midoiraisa is a rishon. Some people felt there you're not allowed to toivel kelim even using a harama. You're being mesaken mana. The whole din of a harama is only if the tumah is only midrabanan, and therefore the chachamim felt the whole thing is midrabanan. The tikkun mana is midrabanan. It's like a double midrabanan. That would be more. That would be a reason to allow ha'arama. But others say no, even when the issue is a biblical. So today, Chad Amar one says that the above topic, the great limitation and leniency that we just learned on Daf Chaf Amid Beis, that we allow for a ha'arama to happen, that's even b'kelim shenitmu ba'av hatuma, meaning that the utensils are tamei on a biblical level. Vada, if the kelim are tamei on a rabbinic level, that would be generally if liquids, not solids, if liquids that are only a rishon had halachic contact with the keli, midoiraisa the kelim are not tamei, midrabanan they are. Avada, you can do ha'arama. Aber v'charino amar, like the Achra. The other one says that this is only the kelim shenitmu b'volad atuma. If the issue is only midrabanan, that is where we allowed to have arama. So we have Amoyra Aleph, Amoyra Beis. Amoyra Aleph is even more lenient. Amoyra Beis, also hold your horses. No, if the issue is biblical, we don't allow harama. You can't toivel, you being mesaken mana midraban. Says the Gemara, Mosiv man the Amr b'volad atuma. The Amoyra Beis, the one that limited the limitation, the more machmir one, asked the more lenient one, Laman the Amar ba'avatuma. He has such a great question. One difference that we spoke out in the introduction. What's the nafkamina, practical, whether a keli is tamei midoiraisa or midrabanan? The practical nafkamina is, because we keep rabbinic law, is that when the utensil is tamei midoiraisa, even though you took it to the mikvah, midoiraisa, it cannot be used for truma only up until tzeis hakechavim. Head of shemesh that we spoke about yesterday isn't only a din on a person, it's a din on a keli. And like we mentioned, if we want to number the level of tuma, after tefillah, prior to head of shemesh, the person or the keli, they are tummy on the level of a sheni, which is exactly why it could be used for chulin, but it may not be used for truma. If there is an issue, midrabanan, now think about it, liquids, mashkin, midrabanan, always go back to becoming a rishon. Mashkin, they become a tchila. Tchila here means a rishon. That means when mashkin touches a keli, it's tamei on the level of a sheni. If you take a sheni to the mikvah, you don't need to have Erev Shemesh. And the same thing is with the person. Think about a person. You're dying, another, right? One of the Shmoyne Oisedover. My hands are tamim as a sheni by default, unless I wash negelvaser. And therefore, if my hands touch truma, it's metame it becomes puzzle. It becomes tamei midrabanan. If I wash negelvaser, I can eat truma. I don't wait until head of shemesh. So the Gemara is asking a question. If you are telling me that the issue is that our leniency is even by a av hatuma, it doesn't make sense. Now let me take one more thing we'll learn today. The beginning of Masechtas Beitza, we learn, and according to most, it's an issue of it's an issue d'oraisa that Shabbos cannot be used to prepare for the weekday. That's called the isur of hachana. Ein Shabbos meichin l'choil. So I have a simple question. I have a keli, it's tummy. We said right now, if the keli is little, no problem. You can make harama. Issue is of haram. And you can be misakin it. It was tummy, it became tor. Then Amoida Aleph says, even if the keli is tummy doiraisa, a harama works. Okay, I'll make a harama. What did I accomplish if I take a keli to the mikvah on Shabbos? If it's tummy on a level of doiraisa, what did I accomplish? All I accomplished is that now, after Shabbos, it's going to become tahor. On Shabbos, it's still tamei. It needs head of shemesh. Which means if you will allow me to do it knowing I'm doing it really l'shem tfilas kelim, I'm covering it up. Isn't this a classic case that I am doing something to prepare for the weekday? That's the Gemara's answer. Let's read it inside. Even in the weekday, when you don't need a harama, when you take a keli that's asan midoiraisa to the mikveh, it doesn't become completely tahor. The words will be there's a vestige, or you put the emphasis on the e. Then there's a vestige of tuma on the keli. Correctly, it's tummy on the level of a sheni, ta'un head of shemesh. And the question is, therefore, l'chu'ura, it should now become asur because you're being meichin mishabas l'choil. Answers the Gemara Amarle. Who told you that the person who's using the ha'arama to be toivel the kelim is doing it because this person wants to use the keli for truma? I agree with you. If the kavana is really to be metahir the keli to use it for truma, you are not allowed to do it even with a ha'arama because you have another issue of achana. What did we learn? We had braises that backed it up. You want to use it for chulin. Chulin can become, don't forget, a sheni. A sheni cannot make chulin tamei, right? Only shitas Rabbi Akiva. We don't paskin like Rabbi Akiva. Doesn't matter. In the times of Bayesheni, when we introduced the whole chaverus, fellowship, the fellowship took upon themselves that they should eat chulin on the standard. I know there's many levels. There's chulin betara, there's chulin altaras truma, there's chulin altaras kodesh. There's many levels to that. Go ava'ayin in the end of the 3rd chapter of Masechtas Chagiga and in many other places. But it was common for people to treat chulin the way they treated truma. Gewaldig.
Yeah, are you allowed to title the keli twice, or if it goes to the second time to remove Erev Shemesh? The Rabbi said if someone's sheni, and if you have a sheni keli, you put it in the mikvah, you don't need Erev Shemesh.
You don't need Erev Shemesh.
You take an keli, title it, and then title it again.
No. So Rabbi Mendel is asking, hold on, Bechlal. This is a general rule. Let's go. You have a biblical keli that's tummy, which means it had contact with a av. So the keli is a rishon. When you take it to the mikvah, we're saying it needs head of shemesh. Why? Because it's the level of a sheni. Rabbi Mendel is saying, well, hold on. If someone is tummy on the level of a sheni, he doesn't need head of shemesh. So why didn't we say go under the water twice? Doesn't work that way. Because the source of head of shemesh, ubo hashemesh v'tohir, I think it's from that pasuk, bias hashemesh here would mean the sun set, and the Torah says you got to wait until it gets dark. I want to say it's amazing. It's amazing that Rabbeinu HaKadosh chose to introduce this din in the first mission of the whole Shas. For some reason, it's that important. Whether it's a din in patience, whether it's the understanding that it's not tamei or tahor, just that concept. It's not black and white, that it's phases. The concept that certain things only get resolved with time. Like there's so much foundational ideas in the din of head of Shemesh, he put it in the beginning. But let's go back and say, this is great. And I want to chop, I know it's already this, we have another minute. Says the Gemara, now that we spoke about Ha'arama, and now that we have one of the two Amoraim that say that Harama is allowed even on a biblical level, let me give you another case. I know it's not biblical, but it's close to that. It was a common practice that people who used to have earthen floors would on occasion sprinkle the floor with water in order to lay the dust down. They were marbitz the floors. We learned in Masechta Shabbos that one is not allowed to do that on Shabbos. Why? Because if you were to have, Aviv, in your earthen floor perforations, holes, one of the ways that people would have smoothed the floor by filling a hole, which is biblically prohibited because of the malach of boina, would be by throwing water. The water would move the dust around, it would settle the dust, and the dust might fill up a hole. Even though this is not your intention, this is really subject to the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon by davar she'eina mischaven. This is subject to it in the case where there's no psikresha. You don't know whether there's holes or not. All of what we're learning now is only latana Rabbi Yehuda that holds that davar she'ein mischaven is asan midrabanan. There is an isun midrabanan to be marbitz the floor. Says the Gemara, if a person wants, they can do a ha'arama and they can be marbitz the floor. What would you do? So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Ze'ed on the name of Rabbi Chia bar Ashi that isha pikachas. Guys, this is gavaldik. We are calling a person who's putting into effect a harama, we're calling this pikches. Pikches means you're shrewd. That a woman who's shrewd, you know what she'll do? The floor is dusty, the house is dusty. But you can't do Rabbi Yehuda. You're not allowed to do marbitz. You can't do harbatza. So madicha koiskan, let her rinse out a cup. There's no grass. If there would be grass in your house, you can't allow the water to fall on the ground. But there was nothing growing. Let her rinse her cup in this corner. Let her rinse her bowl over there. Let her rinse her tamchoy over there. You do a little bit of cleaning here, a little bit of cleaning there. Mitamol, the whole house is already sprinkled with water. Them say some arbetzes base of a Shabbos. That's another example where you can do harama before Danny can jump.